My family hosted a huge party where the whole family was invited, and at night they held a dance competition where every girl danced. When my 6-year-old danced, everyone applauded and said, "You are the best." But my sister began shouting, "No, my daughter did the best." My mother whispered to her saying, "Don't worry, I will take care of it." Later, when everyone went to sleep, my own mother smashed my 6-year-old daughter's legs just because she wasn't satisfied enough. I heard her crying, so I rushed, and that's where she was laughing and said, "Now my precious daughter won't have to feel what she went through." My sister standing next to her started laughing. Crawling looks better on her and my daughter can shine now. I smiled through the pain, knowing they'd never laugh again. I never thought my own mother would destroy my child. But here I am, 4 years later, watching my daughter Emma take her first independent steps with her new prosthetics, and I can finally tell this story without my hands shaking. The party happened on a warm Saturday evening in July. My mother, Patricia, had insisted on hosting our annual family reunion at her sprawling estate in Connecticut. She'd always been the matriarch who demanded perfection, the kind of woman who measured love in achievements and public appearances. My sister Vivian had always been her golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was the disappointment who married a middle-class teacher instead of a lawyer. Vivian's daughter Madison was 7 at the time, a year older than my Emma. My mother had been paying for Madison's dance lessons at some prestigious academy since she was 3 years old. Thousands of dollars poured into costumes, private instructors, and competition fees. Emma had learned to dance in our living room, copying videos on YouTube and twirling around our small apartment with pure joy radiating from her face. The reunion brought together cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends. Nearly 80 people filled the backyard, where white tents had been erected and catering staff moved through the crowds with trays of hors d'oeuvres. My mother loved these displays of wealth and family unity. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary and held court like a queen among her subjects. After dinner, someone suggested the girls should perform for everyone. My mother's eyes lit up with an intensity I should have recognized as dangerous. She immediately began organizing what she called a friendly little showcase for all the young girls in the family. A space was cleared on the patio, music was queued up, and suddenly it became a competition rather than just children having fun. Madison performed first. She executed a routine her instructor had clearly choreographed, complete with proper ballet positions and turns. She wore a sparkly leotard that caught the string lights overhead. Everyone clapped politely, and my mother beamed with pride, already anticipating victory. Then Emma took her turn. She wore a simple sundress with flowers on it, the kind you buy at Target for $20. She didn't have a choreographed routine. She simply moved to the music with uninhibited joy, spinning and leaping and expressing herself through movement in a way that was absolutely genuine. Her face glowed with happiness, and her laughter rang out across the patio. The applause started softly but grew thunderous. People stood up. My Uncle Robert shouted, "That's pure talent right there." Aunt Catherine wiped tears from her eyes and called Emma a natural. Cousin Jennifer recorded the whole thing on her phone, commenting loudly about how Emma had star quality that couldn't be taught. My husband Derek squeezed my hand, pride evident in his smile. Emma ran to us and jumped into my arms, breathless and excited. "Did you see me, Mommy? Did I do good?" "You were absolutely perfect, sweetheart." Vivian's voice cut through the celebration like a knife scraping glass. "Are you all insane? Madison danced the best. She has proper training. She knows actual technique." The crowd fell awkwardly silent. People exchanged uncomfortable glances. Madison stood frozen on the patio, her face crumpling with embarrassment and confusion. "Vivian, please," I said quietly, trying to diffuse the situation. "They're just children having fun. It doesn't matter who is better." "It absolutely matters." Vivian's face had turned crimson, her perfectly applied makeup creasing with fury. "Madison has worked for years to perfect her skills. Your daughter just flailed around like an amateur." My mother stepped closer to Vivian, placing a calming hand on her arm. I watched as she leaned in and whispered something directly into my sister's ear. Whatever she said made Vivian's expression shift from rage to something colder, more calculating. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Don't worry," I heard my mother say as she pulled back. "I will take care of it." At the time, I thought she meant she would talk to the relatives, maybe convince them that Madison deserved more recognition. I was naive enough to believe my mother would handle this with words. The party continued into the evening. Children ran around catching fireflies while adults drank wine and reminisced about old times. Emma played with her younger cousins on the lawn, her energy seemingly endless. Around 10 o'clock, I helped her change into her pajamas in one of my mother's guest rooms. She fell asleep within minutes, exhausted from the excitement. Derek and I stayed downstairs for another hour, making small talk with relatives we only saw once a year. Around midnight, we decided to head to bed ourselves. We were staying overnight since we'd driven 2 hours to get there, and several glasses of wine made the trip home inadvisable. The guest room we'd been assigned was on the second floor, down a long hallway from where Emma slept. My mother had insisted that Emma stay in the room next to hers on the first floor, claiming the child would be more comfortable there. I'd agreed, thinking nothing of it. I woke around 2 in the morning to use the bathroom. The house was silent, everyone finally asleep after the long day. As I padded back toward our room, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A child screaming. Emma's voice, shrill with terror and pain, echoed up from downstairs. I didn't think. I ran, taking the stairs so fast I nearly fell. Derek crashed out of our room behind me, but I was already at the first floor, sprinting toward my mother's wing of the house. Emma's door stood open. Light spilled into the hallway. Her screams had dissolved into broken sobs that tore through my chest like shrapnel. I burst through the doorway and stopped so abruptly that Derek slammed into my back. My mother stood beside Emma's bed, holding the marble statue that usually sat on her mantel. The base was cracked and stained with blood. Emma lay on the bed, her small body writhing in agony, her legs twisted at angles that legs should never bend. But what destroyed me wasn't the sight of my broken child. It was my mother's face. She was smiling. Actually smiling, with an expression of deep satisfaction, as if she'd just completed a difficult but necessary task. "There we go," Patricia said, her voice calm and pleasant. "Now my precious Madison won't have to feel what she went through tonight." Vivian stood in the corner of the room, her hand pressed against her mouth. But she wasn't horrified. She was trying to suppress laughter, her shoulders shaking with barely contained amusement. "Mom?" I whispered, my brain unable to process what I was seeing. "What did you do?" "I fixed the problem, Rebecca. Madison was humiliated tonight because your daughter had to show off and steal her moment. That won't happen again." Emma reached for me, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Mommy, it hurts. It hurts so much." I moved toward her, but Vivian stepped forward, finally letting her laughter escape. "Oh my God, look at her. Crawling looks better on her anyway. Now Madison can shine without competition. Maybe you should have taught your daughter some humility instead of encouraging her to be a spotlight hog." Something inside me shattered. Then it crystallized into something hard and cold and absolutely focused. I smiled. I actually smiled, even as tears streamed down my face, even as my daughter sobbed in agony, even as my husband started shouting and pulling out his phone to call 911. "You're right," I said softly. "Crawling does look different on her." My mother looked pleased, interpreting my words as submission. Vivian laughed again, the sound high and cruel. Neither of them understood that they'd just made the worst mistake of their lives. The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes. Emma was rushed to the hospital with multiple fractures in both legs. Her left femur had been shattered completely, bone fragments damaging muscle and tissue. Her right leg had sustained fractures to both the tibia and fibula. The doctors said she'd need multiple surgeries and might never walk normally again. My mother's statue had done its work thoroughly. The police questioned everyone. My mother claimed she'd heard noises and found Emma having fallen out of bed. Vivian supported this story, saying she'd come to check on the commotion and had witnessed Emma on the floor, clearly having suffered a terrible accident. They'd removed the statue from the room while Derek and I were following the ambulance. They'd cleaned the blood from its base. They'd rehearsed their stories during those 15 minutes, coordinating their lies with the efficiency of lifelong manipulators. But they'd forgotten about the security cameras. My mother's estate had cameras everywhere, inside and out. She'd installed them years ago, paranoid about theft and wanting to monitor her property. She'd been so focused on creating her alibi that she'd forgotten about the silent witnesses recording everything. I didn't mention the cameras to the police initially. Instead, I went home from the hospital that first morning while Emma was in surgery. I told Derek I needed to get clothes and toiletries. What I actually needed was access to my mother's security system. She'd given me the password years ago when I'd house sat for her during a vacation. She'd never changed it because she never imagined I'd use it against her. I downloaded everything from that night. Every angle, every moment, crystal clear digital evidence of my mother deliberately attacking my sleeping child while Vivian watched and then participated in staging the scene afterward. I made 3 copies on separate drives and stored them in different locations. Then I went back to the hospital and waited. Emma came through surgery, but the damage was extensive. They'd inserted rods and pins to hold her bones together. She'd need months of recovery and physical therapy. The doctors still weren't sure if she'd regain full mobility. My daughter looked so small in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines, her legs immobilized in casts. She kept asking me why Grandma had hurt her. I had no answer that wouldn't destroy whatever remained of her innocence. The police investigation continued. Without evidence, it became a question of credibility. My mother was a respected woman in the community, a philanthropist who donated to hospitals and sat on charity boards. Vivian was a lawyer with a spotless reputation. I was a part-time bookkeeper with no social standing. They thought they'd won. 2 weeks after the incident, charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. My mother called me, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so sorry this terrible accident happened, Rebecca. I hope Emma recovers soon. Perhaps we should put this ugliness behind us and focus on family healing." "Perhaps we should," I agreed, my voice steady. She was pleased. She invited us to dinner the following week to start fresh. I declined politely, citing Emma's medical needs. Instead, I consulted with 3 different lawyers. I chose the best one, a woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in civil cases involving child abuse. I showed her the security footage. Her expression never changed as she watched my mother deliberately swing that statue down on my sleeping child's legs. She watched the entire sequence twice, making notes, freezing frames, annotating timestamps. "This is prosecutable," she said finally. "Why haven't you given this to the police?" "Because I want them to suffer longer than prison would allow." Sarah studied me for a long moment. "There are better ways to destroy someone than criminal charges, if you're patient enough." I have nothing but patience now. We filed a civil lawsuit against both my mother and Vivian for assault, battery, child endangerment, conspiracy, and emotional distress. We sued for medical expenses, ongoing care costs, pain and suffering, and punitive damages. The amount was substantial, designed to devastate their finances completely. The lawsuit included the security footage as primary evidence. There was no way to refute what the cameras had recorded. Their entire defense crumbled immediately. But I didn't stop there. I sent copies of the footage to every organization my mother was involved with. Every charity board, every social club, every philanthropic organization that had elevated her to positions of respect and authority. I sent it to her country club, her church, and her homeowners association. I sent it to Vivian's law firm, to the State Bar Association, and to every professional connection she'd cultivated over her career. I created a private YouTube channel and uploaded the footage with full context, then sent links to every extended family member, every friend who'd attended that party, every person who'd applauded Emma that night. I didn't add commentary. I didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. My mother called me screaming. "You've destroyed me. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for. How could you do this to your own mother? How could you do that to my daughter?" I asked calmly. "You have 3 minutes to explain before I hang up and never speak to you again." She couldn't. She stammered about Madison's feelings, about Vivian's disappointment, about family loyalty and respect for elders. She never once expressed remorse for what she'd done to Emma. I hung up on her mid-sentence. Vivian sent a lengthy email attempting to justify their actions, claiming they'd only meant to teach Emma a lesson about humility and things had gotten out of hand. She suggested we could settle the lawsuit quietly if I would remove the videos and stop talking to people. I forwarded her email to Sarah Chen, who added it to our evidence file as an admission of guilt. The weeks following the lawsuit filing became a masterclass in watching people's true natures reveal themselves. Extended family members started choosing sides, and the divisions cut deep through decades of shared history. My father had divorced Patricia 15 years earlier, remarrying a kind woman named Linda who lived in Oregon. When I sent him the security footage, he called me within an hour, his voice shaking with rage and disbelief. He'd always known Patricia was cold and calculating, but this exceeded even his worst assumptions about her character. He offered to fly out immediately, to testify, to do whatever would help our case. His support meant everything during those dark months. My mother's sister, Aunt Helen, called me crying after watching the video. She'd worshipped Patricia her entire life, always trying to earn approval from her older sister who'd married well and built a life of luxury. Seeing what Patricia had done shattered Helen's illusions completely. She sent a written statement to our lawyer detailing years of Patricia's manipulative behavior and her toxic favoritism toward Vivian. Helen described incidents where Patricia had deliberately sabotaged me throughout my childhood, undermining my achievements while praising even Vivian's smallest accomplishments. But not everyone rallied to our side. Patricia's wealthy friends circled the wagons initially, convinced that I must have doctored the footage or exaggerated the situation. Several relatives accused me of tearing the family apart over an accident that I was blowing out of proportion. Cousin Michael sent a vicious email claiming I was jealous of Vivian's success and had always been too sensitive. He suggested I was using Emma's injury to extract money from the family. I forwarded Michael's email to the entire family along with a link to the unedited security footage. I never heard from him again, though I later learned his wife had filed for separation after reading his message and realizing what kind of person she'd married. The media discovered the story about 3 months after we filed the lawsuit. A journalist from a local newspaper got wind of the case through court filings and started investigating. The headline read, "Prominent philanthropist accused of attacking granddaughter after dance competition." Within 48 hours, the story went viral. News vans parked outside my mother's estate. Reporters ambushed her at the grocery store, the bank, her doctor's appointments. She initially tried to maintain her dignity, offering no comment with her head held high. But the constant scrutiny wore her down. I watched news footage of her deterioration, how she went from poised and controlled to haggard and desperate within weeks. Vivian handled the attention even worse. She gave an interview to a local television station where she tried to defend herself, claiming the video had been taken out of context. She suggested that Emma had been acting out violently and that Patricia had been trying to protect herself. The interviewer asked her to explain the audio of her laughing and commenting about Emma crawling. Vivian stammered, her face flushing, before walking out of the interview mid-question. The footage of her fleeing went viral, spawning memes and harsh commentary across social media. Emma's recovery during this period was agonizing to witness. The initial surgeries had been just the beginning. Infections set in twice, requiring additional procedures and stronger antibiotics. She developed complications from the hardware in her legs, her body rejecting some of the pins and plates. Each setback felt like another assault, another layer of damage that Patricia and Vivian had inflicted. Physical therapy was brutal. Emma would scream during sessions, the pain of forcing damaged muscles and bones to function overwhelming her small body. I held her hand through every session, whispering encouragement while crying behind my sunglasses. The therapists were patient and kind, but they couldn't make the process any less excruciating. Derek struggled too. He blamed himself for not being more cautious about where Emma slept that night. I'd find him at 3 a.m. sitting in Emma's room, just watching her sleep, as if his vigilance now could somehow compensate for his absence then. He saw a therapist weekly, working through his guilt and rage. Our marriage strained under the weight of trauma and constant medical crises. We nearly broke during Emma's 4th surgery. Derek wanted to settle the lawsuit, take whatever money Patricia and Vivian would offer, and move far away to start fresh. He argued that dragging everything through court was re-traumatizing Emma and preventing us all from healing. We fought viciously, saying things we'd never said to each other before. He called me obsessed with revenge. I called him weak for wanting to let them escape with minimal consequences. We separated for 2 weeks. Derek stayed with his brother while I managed Emma's care alone. Those 14 days of solo parenting a severely injured child while coordinating legal strategy and fielding media inquiries pushed me to my absolute limit. I understood Derek's position better then. Part of me wanted to run too, to take Emma somewhere quiet and pretend none of this had ever happened. But every time I considered backing down, I'd remember my mother's smile as she stood over Emma's broken body. I'd remember Vivian's laughter. The memory hardened my resolve every single time. Derek came back. We went to couples therapy and worked through our different processing styles. He wasn't weak, he was traumatized and trying to protect what remained of our family. I wasn't obsessed, I was ensuring our daughter's attackers couldn't hurt anyone else. We found our way back to each other, unified in our purpose even if we approached it differently. The discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed even more disturbing information. Sarah Chen subpoenaed Patricia's financial records and found evidence that she'd been funneling excessive amounts of money to Vivian for years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been transferred under the guise of loans that were never repaid. Patricia had been bankrolling Vivian's lifestyle, funding Madison's expensive activities, and essentially buying Vivian's loyalty and devotion. We also discovered that this hadn't been the first time Patricia had acted violently. Medical records from 30 years earlier showed that my mother had been treated for a broken hand, the injury sustained from striking a wall in frustration. The timing corresponded with a childhood incident I'd completely blocked out. I'd been 8 years old and had won a school art competition. Patricia had been furious because Vivian had lost in the music category. I remembered Patricia screaming at me that night, but I'd forgotten that she'd also struck me across the face hard enough to give me a bloody nose. She told the pediatrician I'd fallen on the playground. The doctor had believed her because Patricia was charming and respectable, because mothers like her didn't abuse their children. Except she had, and she'd gotten away with it, and her success had emboldened her to escalate years later with Emma. Sarah filed an amended complaint adding evidence of a pattern of abuse and violence. The new filing included my childhood medical records, statements from my therapist confirming I'd recovered suppressed memories of abuse, and expert testimony about how Patricia's behavior demonstrated escalating antisocial tendencies. Patricia's legal team scrambled to respond. They hired a publicity firm to rehabilitate her image, planting stories about her charitable work and her reputation as a devoted grandmother. They suggested I was an unreliable narrator with mental health issues, implying that my recovered memories were false and that I was fabricating a narrative of abuse to strengthen our civil case. The strategy backfired spectacularly. Multiple former employees of Patricia's came forward with their own stories of her cruelty. Her housekeeper of 15 years gave a deposition describing how Patricia would berate and demean her, once throwing a vase at her head for missing a spot while dusting. Her gardener testified about witnessing Patricia deliberately run over a neighborhood cat that had wandered onto her property, laughing about it afterward. Her former personal assistant described a toxic work environment where Patricia would make impossible demands and then punish people for failing to meet them. A picture emerged of someone who derived pleasure from exercising power over vulnerable people. Patricia wasn't just a grandmother who'd made a terrible mistake in the heat of the moment. She was someone who'd spent her entire life hurting people whenever she felt slighted or challenged, someone who'd simply escalated to attacking a child when an adult target wasn't available. Vivian's past came under scrutiny too. Former colleagues from her law firm were interviewed, many of them eager to share stories about her unethical behavior and willingness to bend rules to win cases. One paralegal described watching Vivian deliberately withhold evidence favorable to an opposing party, an action that could have gotten her disbarred even without the Emma situation. Another colleague recounted Vivian bragging about manipulating judges and intimidating witnesses. The State Bar Association launched a separate investigation based on these revelations. They discovered multiple violations of professional conduct that Vivian had committed over her career. The attack on Emma was simply the most egregious in a long list of ethical failures. Madison became a tragic figure in all of this. Photos surfaced of her at various dance competitions, always looking tense and unhappy despite her technical skill. In one video from a regional competition 2 years before the party, you could hear Vivian screaming criticism at her from the audience, calling her sloppy and telling her she'd better win or there would be consequences. The child was 5 years old in the footage, performing under crushing pressure instead of enjoying her hobby. Child Services interviewed Madison as part of the investigation into Vivian's fitness as a parent. The details of those interviews were sealed, but Sarah told me enough to break my heart. Madison had been living under constant pressure to be perfect, to win every competition, to justify the money and attention Patricia and Vivian invested in her. She'd been told repeatedly that Emma was trying to steal her spotlight, that Emma was the enemy who needed to be defeated. Madison had absorbed this toxicity. She'd internalized the belief that her worth was contingent on being better than everyone else, particularly better than Emma. When Emma had danced beautifully and received genuine applause, it had shattered Madison's carefully constructed self-image. She'd apparently asked her mother to make Emma stop being good at dancing, not understanding what her grandmother would do with that request. Learning this complicated my feelings. Madison was a victim too, twisted by Patricia's poison and Vivian's ambition. I hoped her father could provide the therapy and stable environment she'd need to recover from such a toxic upbringing. The trial preparations consumed 8 months of our lives. Depositions, document reviews, expert consultations, and strategy sessions filled every spare moment. Emma had to be examined by multiple doctors who would testify about the extent of her injuries and the long-term prognosis. Each examination meant reliving the trauma, explaining again what had happened, enduring strangers poking and measuring her damaged legs. We also had to prepare Emma to testify. Sarah hired a child psychologist who specialized in helping young witnesses navigate the court system. Dr. Reynolds spent weeks with Emma, using play therapy and age-appropriate explanations to help her understand what would happen in the courtroom. Emma practiced answering questions, learned how to ask for breaks if she became overwhelmed, and gradually built the courage to tell her story in front of strangers. The night before trial, Emma couldn't sleep. She climbed into bed with Derek and me around midnight, wedging herself between us like she'd done when she was much younger. "Mommy, what if Grandma says she's sorry? Would we have to forgive her? Do you want to forgive her?" I asked carefully. Emma thought about this, her small face serious in the dim light. "I don't know. She's my grandma. But she hurt me really bad. And she wasn't sorry when she did it." She was smiling. "Then you don't have to forgive her, baby. Forgiveness isn't something anyone can force you to give. It's okay to protect yourself from people who hurt you, even if they're family. But you always say family is important. Family who loves you and protects you is important. Family who hurts you on purpose isn't really family anymore. They're just people you used to know." She nodded against my shoulder. "Okay. I'm not going to forgive her then. Maybe when I'm grown up I'll feel different, but right now I'm still too mad and sad." "That's perfectly reasonable, sweetheart." She fell asleep eventually, her breathing evening out while Derek and I lay awake on either side of her, both of us staring at the ceiling and dreading what the next day would bring. The civil case went to trial 10 months after the incident. Emma attended court in a wheelchair, her legs still healing from a fourth surgery. She was 7 years old now, and she had to testify about what her grandmother had done to her. She described waking up to see Grandma Patricia standing over her bed with a statue. She described the pain, the confusion, the terror of not understanding why someone who was supposed to love her would hurt her so badly. She cried on the stand, and several jurors cried with her. My mother's lawyer tried to discredit the video evidence, suggesting it had been manipulated or taken out of context. The forensic analysis proved otherwise. The footage was authentic, unedited, and utterly damning. Vivian attempted to claim she'd been in shock and hadn't known what to do. The prosecution played the audio of her laughing and making jokes about Emma crawling. Her own words condemned her. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found both defendants liable on all counts and awarded us $12 million in damages. My mother's estate, carefully built over decades of investment and inheritance, was liquidated to pay the judgment. The Connecticut mansion was sold. Her investment portfolio was emptied. Her retirement accounts were seized. She lost everything except a small allowance that allowed her to rent a modest apartment in a town where nobody knew her name. Every organization she'd been part of had severed ties. Her friends stopped calling. Her social circle evaporated. She became invisible, the worst possible fate for a woman who'd defined herself by status and recognition. Vivian lost her law license after the Bar Association investigation concluded she'd demonstrated moral turpitude incompatible with legal practice. Her husband divorced her, citing the scandal and his own horror at discovering what she'd done. She lost custody of Madison in the divorce proceedings after the judge reviewed the evidence and determined she'd created an environment that encouraged violence against children. She works as a paralegal now, in a different state, using a different last name. She'll never practice law again. She'll never regain the prestige she once had. Every background check will reveal what she did, what she laughed about, what she endorsed with her silence and complicity. Madison lives with her father. I've had no contact with her, but I hope she receives therapy and grows up understanding that what happened wasn't Emma's fault. She was just a child caught in the crossfire of her grandmother's cruelty and her mother's vicious insecurity. Emma endured 17 surgeries over 4 years. The damage was so extensive that eventually, the doctors recommended bilateral amputation below the knee. Her legs couldn't heal properly, and she was in constant pain. We made that decision together when she was 9. She told me she just wanted to run again, and if losing parts of her legs meant she could eventually do that, she was ready. She got her first prosthetics 8 months ago. She fell dozens of times learning to use them. She cried from frustration and phantom pain and exhaustion. But she kept trying, fueled by a determination I wish she'd never had to develop. Last week, she walked a full mile without assistance. Next month, she starts training for adaptive dance classes. She wants to perform again, to feel that joy she felt before her grandmother's jealousy destroyed her body. I watch her practice her balance in our living room, and I see glimpses of that carefree 6-year-old who danced with pure happiness. That child is gone, transformed by trauma into someone harder and more resilient than any child should have to be. The money from the lawsuit paid for her medical care and will fund her future needs. We established a trust that ensures she'll have financial security regardless of what challenges her disabilities present. We donated a significant portion to organizations that support children with limb differences and fund prosthetic research. We never speak to my mother or Vivian. They've attempted contact numerous times, sending letters that range from self-pitying to hostile. We return them unopened. They are legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Emma or contacting her in any way. Violation would result in immediate arrest. My mother wrote me once that I'd ruined her life over an accident, that I'd chosen revenge over family. I almost laughed when I read those words. She truly believed that's what had happened, that she was the victim of my vindictiveness rather than the architect of her own destruction. I destroyed them methodically and completely because they looked at my broken child and laughed. They planned her injury and whispered conspiracy and executed it while she slept helpless and innocent. They showed no remorse, only satisfaction. I didn't want them in prison where they could paint themselves as martyrs, where they could serve time and eventually reintegrate into society with their suffering having a defined end point. I wanted them to live long lives with nothing, to wake up every day knowing they'd lost everything because they'd chosen cruelty over love. I wanted my mother to grow old alone, abandoned by everyone who'd once sought her approval, supported only by the bare minimum required by law. I wanted Vivian to struggle financially and professionally, forever marked by her actions, unable to rebuild the prestigious life she'd valued above basic human decency. I got exactly what I wanted. Some relatives have suggested I should forgive them, that holding on to anger will only hurt me in the long run. They don't understand that I'm not angry anymore. Anger is hot and consuming. What I feel is cold and permanent. I feel the same way about them that I'd feel about strangers who hurt my child. They're nothing to me now. Their suffering doesn't bring me joy, but their destruction was necessary. You don't leave predators free to hunt just because they share your DNA. Emma asked me recently if I hated Grandma Patricia. We were sitting on our porch, watching the sunset, her prosthetic legs propped up beside her while she rested. No, baby. I don't hate her. Then why did you take everything away from her? I thought carefully about how to answer. Emma deserved honesty, but she also deserved protection from the full darkness of human nature. Sometimes people do things so terrible that they have to face consequences. Grandma hurt you on purpose because she cared more about winning than about your safety. I made sure she couldn't hurt you or anyone else ever again. That's what mothers do. They protect their children, no matter what it costs. Even if the bad person is their own mom? Especially then. She nodded slowly, processing this. I'm glad you're my mom and not like her. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. We sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned orange and purple. Emma leaned against my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, feeling the warmth of her presence and the steady rhythm of her breathing. She's alive. She's here. She'll dance again, even if it looks different now. That's what matters. That's what I fought for when I dismantled my mother's life piece by piece and ensured Vivian lost everything she'd valued above basic humanity. They taught me that family means nothing without love and respect. They taught Emma that some people will hurt you for no reason other than their own inadequacy. They taught us both that justice isn't always delivered by courts or police. Sometimes you have to build it yourself from evidence and determination and the willingness to burn bridges that should have been protecting you. I sleep well at night. My conscience is clear. I didn't destroy them out of revenge, though I won't pretend their suffering doesn't feel appropriate. I destroyed them because they were dangerous, because they looked at an innocent child and decided her pain was acceptable collateral damage in their petty competition. Emma deserves a world where people face consequences for that kind of evil. I couldn't give her back her legs, but I could give her justice and safety and the certainty that her mother would never let anyone hurt her without paying the full price. My mother wanted to take care of the problem that night. She succeeded. The problem was her and Vivian, and I took care of it permanently. They'll never laugh again, not really. They'll exist in the ruins of their former lives, haunted by the memory of a little girl crying in pain while they smiled with satisfaction. That haunting will last until their final breaths, and it will never relent. I smile sometimes, thinking about that. Through the pain and the surgeries and the long road to Emma's recovery, I smile knowing that justice was served exactly as it should have been. Cold, complete, and permanent.